Star Wars, we meet again. I'm talking about the original Star Wars, 1977, otherwise known as Episode 4, A New Hope. I had an opportunity to watch this movie again. I hadn't watched it in quite a while, but none of my students had seen it, almost none of them. And so we had a little contest, and they ended up getting to watch the movie, and it was really, really cool to be able to show that to them. And I thought I would talk again about Star Wars and talk about this original movie in the context of modern cinema and as a writer and all those sorts of things. So I wanted to give a little bit of an analysis from my perspective. The original crawl, by the way, did not actually say A New Hope. It just said Star Wars, and it gave you the crawl. The New Hope came when they re-released it, I think in 1980, before Empire Strikes Back came out, and for continuity reasons, and because they wanted people to feel like they were in the middle of a larger saga. The big question, let's start with the big parts of it. Does it stand the test of time? And the short answer is yes. It remains a very, very good movie. And it's good in a whole bunch of ways. My first impression with it, besides that it's good, is that it would probably not be made today. And the reason it probably wouldn't be made today is not because it uses real sets or because of its aesthetic or because it used ship models or something like that. None of the technical reasons as much as the stylistic reasons. This is a movie that has a much slower and more deliberate pace to its cinematic style. A pace that I think would be considered unacceptable by a lot of modern studios. And of course, we see that with the new Star Wars Episode 7. The new one has a very, very much a breakneck pace. And this old one has a lot slower feel to it. And I think that I do prefer that slower feel. So that's one of the things that is an immediate impression, is that this is a very differently made movie from what we would get today. It really stands in a huge contrast with modern action movies and modern sort of blockbusters. And this was one of the biggest blockbusters of all time. If my memory serves me, it is the second most popular movie ever in terms of box office sales adjusted for inflation. I think the first is still Gone with the Wind. All of the visuals are very good, and they do remain good. We don't have to look at them and say, like, well, they're good for 1977. It's like, no, they look good now for the most part. So overall, it's a good movie. It's a technically good movie, and I think the story really holds up. I think it's still a really enjoyable story to watch. I will say that for this, I did watch the special editions, and I have the originals on VHS, but I haven't watched them in quite a long time. I did consult a couple of YouTube videos that showed me all of the differences between the special editions of various, there's actually several special editions, and the original theatrical cuts. Most of the changes are actually kind of for the better of the movie, in that they made the whole image quality better. Because the image quality is a little better with the special editions, that's pretty good. So let me get into some more detail. First thing I want to talk about is the story and the setting. So the first thing is the setting of Star Wars is actually a fantasy setting. I classify it as a fantasy setting. It is sort of futuristic space setting, but it has magic in it, the Force, and we get this essential part of the setting, which is the Force, the magic system of Star Wars, revealed one piece at a time throughout the movie. As we need to know more about the Force, more of the Force is revealed. There's a musical theme that goes along whenever the Force is happening, that famous horn theme that you hear with the binary sunset and all that. That's called the Force theme. One of the reasons that I do say this is a fantasy setting is none of the technology is really explained. There's blasters, there's lightspeed ships, there's giant battle stations, but we don't have a scientific explanation of how those work. They're just part of the setting, and so they really just sort of add into sort of a high fantasy in space sort of feel that Star Wars is really good at, and this movie in particular is very, very good at it. Some other things about the setting that I think are really good. The aliens, there's a lot of aliens in this, and George Lucas really takes the time to show you all the aliens and what they look like. You get to see a huge variety of all the different like creatures, especially when you go into like the cantina in Mos Eisley, and you get to see lots of very crazy looking creatures. He really gives you the time to take those in and observe them. There's not just like a flash shot of a bunch of aliens and then you move on with the story. There's long shots of all of the spaceships and things like that. One of the things that I think is really great about the setting is that there's this feeling that the world is very used and abused. We have ships that look old and they're full of details. And when I talk about some of the technical parts of this is where some of the technical things in the movie add into the setting. That when we look at the Millennium Falcon, we have this idea that we're looking at something very old and very well used, something very weathered. There's a huge amount of detail in every single part of all the sets used in Star Wars and all of the models used in Star Wars, and that lends a really real sort of layer to the movie where we feel like this world could really exist. It definitely helps with the immersion, is that level of detail. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is characters. The characters in this movie follow a couple of basic archetypes. You have the hero's journey kind of character, and I'm not going to get deep into the monomyth. The monomyth is not that important for understanding this movie or really enjoying it. But you have Luke Skywalker, who's the quintessential hero. His desire is for essentially something more than what he has. That's his opening drive. He really doesn't like being a moisture farmer. He doesn't really like living with his uncle. He wants something more. He wants to get off of Tatooine, his home planet, and see things. And when he encounters a couple of droids that have escaped from an attack by the Empire are the bad guys, the Rebellion are the good guys in this particular movie. This old man that he's known for a long time basically says, you should come away with me and be a Jedi like your father before you. And Luke is very, very drawn to that idea. And the ties with him are finally cut when his parents are murdered by the Empire, which gives him both the freedom to go do what he wants to do, which is to escape Tatooine, but also sets him clearly against the Empire, whereas before that, he's possibly a more neutral character. He says, yeah, of course the Empire's bad, but what can I do about it? And I think there was actually a scene that was cut from the original that I've heard Mark Hamill talk about, where Luke is having a conversation with a friend, and the friend is going to go join the Empire, and Luke is very excited and happy for him because Luke starts off as a very neutral character, and it's not till the Empire kills his parents that he really becomes opposed to the Empire and views them as evil. You have Princess Leia, who's the first sort of protagonist that you see, played by Carrie Fisher. She's as far as a character in this, she's sort of like the archetypal strong woman in this. She has her aims are to overthrow the Empire. Her aims are really bigger than Luke's early on. Luke's aims are, I gotta escape this planet. Leia's aims are, we have to stop the Empire. The Empire is evil. So she has much bigger ideas than Luke does. You have Han Solo, who's an archetypal mercenary. He's truly like chaotic neutral. He is he's basically for himself. He's a neutral character, and his character arc is towards the end of the movie. He grows to basically identify with his friends through this friendship with Luke. He grows to actually take sides on a conflict and to do things that aren't solely for his own benefit but for other people. So you have this great character arc for all three of the main protagonists. You have Luke, who realizes that he could be destined for greatness, which is what he wants. You have Leia, who's seeking to oppose the Empire and is able to be successful at that. And you have Han, who has been sort of dragged along his character arc from being a selfish person who is only really looking out for himself to being a person who has aims that are beyond his own immediate self-interest. So those are the character arcs for the protagonists. You have two really good antagonists. You have like the Admiral, and you have Darth Vader. And Darth Vader is sort of the main antagonist because he's the one who ends up persisting through all the movies. Darth Vader is the Dark Jedi. He's essentially the antithesis of the wise guide for Luke, who is Obi-Wan Kenobi. You have Darth Vader, the antithesis, who is the evil one. He's the one who is really a bad guy all the way through. And you see him right from the opening scene. They do a great job of showing him being absolutely relentless with his goals. And so with the characters, I say a good plot is derived from characters' goals. And so Vader's goal is really to further the Empire, to have this ordered sort of top-down authoritarian society. And then you have the other characters who are opposed to that. And Vader relentlessly pursues that aim. He's like, tear the ship apart. He kills people. You see him right from the opening scene. He just kills, he chokes this guy to death. He chokes guys that like mouth off with the Force, and it all has an impression of a very, very bad character. Now, Darth Vader is, for the most part, fairly static. He doesn't have, he's there to be the bad guy. He doesn't have his own growth arc, except so much that he is cautious. He grows cautious about sort of the power of the rebellion because of Obi-Wan Kenobi. But it's not really, he doesn't really like progress very much in general. He's there to be the bad guy, but he's a very, very excellent bad guy. He's very, very effective. And Admiral, he's sort of Vader's boss in this movie, and his sort of flaw is hubris. He's prideful. There's a part towards the end of the movie where he's bringing his giant battle station, the Death Star, in to blow up a rebel planet, and one of his aides is like, do you want me to prepare your ship? And he says, evacuate now? No, not in the moment of our triumph. There's no way we can lose. And then, of course, his pride is his undoing, and he ends up being killed. So his usual flaw is pride, and he makes that same mistake again by first believing that Princess Leia would tell him the truth about where the rebel base is hidden. Of course, she doesn't, and Vader says, I told you she would never consciously betray the rebellion. And then he also doubts Vader's ability to locate the rebel base by letting the trio of protagonists escape on the Millennium Falcon, which, of course, is a plan that works out for Vader, even though the battle station is destroyed. Ultimately, he's the one who's proven right. So Vader really is like the bad guy who's extremely competent and therefore scary, versus the Admiral, who's also very competent, but he has a tragic flaw, which is hubris, and that flaw is what ultimately causes his aim of destroying the rebellion to fail. So really, really good character arcs with one of the antagonists and basically all the protagonists. So I really like the characters. I do think the characters in general are pretty likable. You immediately identify with Luke because he's the everyman. You immediately like Han because he's sort of like the badass. And you even like Leia because she's the strong woman. And of course, we like to watch people be in conflict. And there's a conflict between Han and Leia all through the movie. And it definitely provides a lot of forward momentum with those character arcs. Let's talk briefly about the plot. The plot is, as I said before, a lot of people talk about the monomyth in relation to this plot. You have a plot where you have a main character who longs for something greater. A wise old man shows him how to get out of where he's at, and then he goes on a great adventure with that wise old man and ends up doing really cool, amazing things. The basic plot is very, very straightforward and centered, and the conflict runs all the way through it. Right from the beginning, you have Princess Leia hiding away these Death Star plans, and at the end of the movie, you're fighting the Death Star. So everything is built around trying to destroy this mighty, mighty ultimate battle station called the Death Star, which is the size of like a small moon. It's absolutely gigantic and can destroy an entire planet. That's how powerful it is. It's pretty horrible piece of technology, and they demonstrate how bad it is by blowing up a peaceful planet at a certain point. So that's really what the plot's about. There are some... there's actually very few coincidences in the plot. So some people have talked about there's a lot of coincidences in the plot, but there's not that many. Leia's captured. Of course, she's brought to the Death Star, which is the battle station where she can be interrogated. When Luke gets the droids, that's kind of a coincidence, but of course he already knows Obi-Wan, and so from there the plot propels itself forward through the character's own desires and wishes. They get captured at the Death Star, not by coincidence, because the Death Star wanted to make a demonstration and to get in. The admiral wanted to get information out of Leia, so threatened this entire planet and then blew it up anyway. So they get captured. It's not really coincidence because that's where they were aiming to go anyway. Everybody had their aims on that planet. They get captured. Of course, they find out Leia's there. That's not really coincidence either. That's like an opportunity. And then, of course, the protagonists get to meet and finally escape. The tension and the danger are constantly being upped throughout the plot, and that makes it, I think, a very, very effective plot. And especially the last 15 minutes, which is spent entirely attacking the Death Star to try to resolve the plot and finally destroy it. Those are also very, very tense, very enjoyable minutes within the plot. So characters, setting, plot, they all work together really well to make a very effective movie with a high amount of tension that pays off in a big way at the end. And I think it's worth noting that the plot is very, very effective. There's not really any points where the plot takes a break, but there's a lot of time spent showing you things and letting the tension sort of sit on the surface in lots of scenes, and I think that really helps the plot feel like it's continually, like the stakes are continually being upped. So I very much am a fan of the plot. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about production. The production of Star Wars is a gigantic topic, but it's one that is, I'll try to talk briefly about it because it creates such an effective movie. The first thing that I really want to talk about, I want to go back, I want to show you the Millennium Falcon in this hangar. The first thing that I really want to talk about is the aesthetic and the visual style for not just what objects are there, but how those objects are constructed. So if you look at the Millennium Falcon has a massive amount of detail. There are no clean lines on this ship. This would be a clean line here, but it's broken up by all kinds of little details. There's not a straight line here. It's broken up by all kinds of little pipes, conduits. Every surface is textured and filled with detail. Even the dish is not symmetrical. This object is asymmetrical. And I think the asymmetry is a big part of what makes this particular object, the Millennium Falcon, so appealing, is that we feel like we could stare at it for hours and not get all the details quite figured out. We have a lot of details that show up in the way that the movie is shot. So in the opening scene, after our famous crawl text, which is now become a staple of the movies, of the Star Wars movies and Star Wars games too, we get to see a spaceship, and then we see a bigger ship approaching. And as we see this bigger ship approaching, we see the same thing. There's no clean lines. We think we see clean lines, but we're kind of seeing all the surfaces are broken up by texture, by divots, by things that are happening at different levels. There is no straight, smooth textures in the universe. And as that gets bigger, this is a great cinematic shot. As the ship basically is shot by the camera pulling backwards over the ship, we get to see just how gigantic this Star Destroyer is. We see lots of little details as it goes. We have this hangar bay, we have hooks, we have lights, we have little textures all over the place. There's no section of this ship that is not covered with an immense amount of detail. Likewise, inside the hangar, there's detail besides the Millennium Falcon. There's no clean lines on the Millennium Falcon. Makes it feel like a real object. But there's also a huge amount of detail everywhere. There's objects sitting on top of this platform. The stairs and the rails are not symmetrical either. There's no clean lines on the stairs or rails. All this, what this serves to do is it sort of breaks up the visual space of what's going on. Makes it feel very dense and very Baroque. So if you look at a Baroque painting, if you imagine you just sort of sweep your eyes past a Baroque painting, it's almost impossible to take in all the details of a Baroque painting. There's just, especially something that's depicting a really grand scene, there's just too much there to really look for. So you have to stop and you want to look at all the details. But if you imagine in a movie where the camera is pushing you through the scene, you don't ever really get to take in all those tiny details. And what you end up with is just a feeling that what you saw was very real because you couldn't take in all the details. Just like how if you scan around your room, it's very difficult to take in all the details. If you look behind me, there's a bunch of details. And that's part of what makes that table back there real. And like my guitar's over in the corner and books piled up and keyboards and all that kind of stuff. That makes it feel like a real world. And so that production aesthetic really, really helps the entire movie to feel more realistic. Likewise, when we are looking at the Death Star, this is just one tiny section of the Death Star, but we see that the towers have things that look like ladders on them. They have vents. The cannons themselves are incredibly detailed. Then we also have very slight variations in color as well. It's not just gray. There's some olive green patches, and that breaks up the visual space, so it's difficult for us to take everything in. If these had been smooth walled, like if we were making it in 1999, it would have looked very artificial and very strange to us. But because everything is broken up, because there's no straight lines, if you just look at the plates on the towers, there's no straight lines anywhere. There's just jagged lines, jagged. There's very few straight lines. That really prevents the viewer from grasping just all the details of the object, and then it impresses in their mind that the object is very, very real. It has a very, very realistic looking to it. Okay. What also supports the style of the movie and the effectiveness of the movie is, to me, the cinematography. And the cinematography and editing as kind of one cohesive unit. The cinematography in this movie is actually really good, and it's a type and a style of cinematography that I don't think anyone would let a filmmaker get away with today, because it would seem boring to, I think, a lot of people that obviously are putting out movies now. Episode 4 would seem really boring. There's all these shots of just scenery, of like a vehicle slowly moving, of people staring at a binary sunset and just letting the score play. But to me, that sort of more, what some people call like a more documentary style, it really helps the world to feel real, because we have a chance to take in all of these details, all the details that are here in the visual space. We get a chance to really try to look and figure out all the details that are there, and it really does work. We have a much slower cinematography than we get in a modern movie, and I think it makes Star Wars more effective. Like, you get to see all the things that are very visually exciting. We get to see, and not just see, but we get to really see them. We get to really look at them. George Lucas really gives you time to take in the visuals that he's created, and I really, really appreciate that. The editing, likewise, also supports that cinematography style, and it really helps with every scene. You get a chance to really see what's going on in every scene. You get a chance to see characters talk to each other, to react, to look around their environment. You get to take in the environment. And that slower editing style also actually increases the tension of the movie. So I'll give you an example. One of the scenes, Luke is in this trash. Luke and Han and Leia are trying to escape from the detention cell, and they end up in this trash compactor. And there's a monster in the trash compactor. And it's over several minutes, actually, the monster is slithering around through the water. It's pulling Luke under. The trash compactor's going. And why would we, like in a modern movie, why would you spend 5 or 8 or 10 minutes in a trash compactor? It's like, that would seem boring to most modern filmmakers, but it has an incredible amount of tension because they allow those things to happen. Tension comes from the anticipation of something bad happening. So when you have the monster slithering past your leg, that ups the tension. And I think a lot of modern filmmakers make the mistake of thinking tension and excitement are the same thing. They're not. That you create tension in a movie by having lots of stuff happen, but that's not the way tension works. Tension is the anticipation of something happening, and George Lucas uses that to really good effect. In the trash compactor scene, there's a scene where they are attacking the Death Star for 15 minutes of just them attacking the Death Star, flying their ships in and trying to drop in torpedoes into this little hole to blow it up. That creates a lot of tension, especially as pilot after pilot is killed by Darth Vader and by the TIE fighters. It has a really, really effective tension to it. So the tension of the scenes really is allowed to blossom and to affect the viewer in a really positive way. And that's what makes the plot seem so exciting, is that the tension's always being drawn through the characters' actions, through their conflicts with each other, through their continual state of danger, all the way to the last moment. And they do that by making you anticipate that bad thing that's going to happen, not by having a lot of action. And in reality, most modern action movies can be quite boring because there's no tension. There's just things happening. There's things exploding, but there's not a fear of something really bad happening that really will up the tension in the scene. Likewise, I think the editing gives you exactly the right amount of a scene to understand what's going on. Then you get to move on, and that helps that tension go through. So the editing really, really supports the overall feel and style of the movie. The sound design is incredible. I don't think I've heard a movie that sounds as good as this movie does. And I was watching the special edition, which has very high sound fidelity. And I'm very, very thankful that when they did the special edition, they did it. I'm assuming they did this sound transfer back in the 90s and maybe have cleaned it up since then. But it's not compressed. There are quiet moments where people talk, where just you hear the music quietly, and then there's really loud moments. Like the blasters are really loud. The lightsabers really crackle and whiz and explode when they hit each other, and that has a really, really, really good effect. The sound is really effective. There's sounds that make you want to jump out of your seat because they're sudden and they're much louder than the surrounding amount. So when I reviewed Force Awakens, I talked about how the entire sound level of the new Star Wars movie was compressed and then turned up as loud as it could be. So it was very mastered, very close to zero on the digital scale. But we don't perceive that as loud because in Star Wars, we have these quiet moments. The original Star Wars, we have these quiet moments, and then we have loud things happen, and man, they feel loud. You also have an opportunity for the music to be really loud, and the music is heard throughout. The score has a big, big impact. So I'll talk about the music. The music is awesome. This is the music that most people are going to be most familiar with and sort of most in love with, which is written by John Williams, contains all the themes. It's very thematically used, just like you were to watch, say, a Wagnerian opera. The music's really allowed to tell you a story in a way that I don't think modern cinema allows very much. But in Star Wars, we get a chance to have just the music. Like we have like a scene where Luke is watching the sunset on Tatooine, and we have the Force theme play, and it's a really, really beautiful scene. And I'll probably link it below, like I did in some of the other movies, because I think it's just such a great piece of cinema. I don't think that scene could be included in a lot of modern movies, because someone would see it and be like, well, nothing's happening. Well, no, something's happening. The character is engaged in thought with himself, and the music is telling you how he feels and what's at work. That's really cool. I don't think we get that very much anymore, and I think we're somewhat amiss because of it. I think modern cinema is lacking because we don't have those moments anymore. So the music's great. It's performed by the London Symphony Orchestra. Likewise, it's not compressed. There are quiet moments. There are loud moments. The music's very clear. The performances are very good. The brass section sounds great. The strings have a great clarity to them. It's all around. It's an excellent sound recording. And like I said, supports the overall sound design. The sound design is definitely, to me, like a 10 out of 10. It's an amazing piece of work for sound design. And we ought to have more movies that have an approach to sound design like this, where things really flash out and are loud, where we have loud moments and quiet moments. And even within the loud moments, we have big spikes of amplitude that are followed by silence that really give a lot of punch and the perception of space to the sounds. Makes the sound a lot more realistic. Let's talk about visual effects briefly. There's a lot of practical effects. These are technically models that they shot over a chroma key, and then they shot a separate shot of a camera being dragged backwards through a bigger model. But like I said, you have all these lines that are broken up, no clean lines, which gives a lot of detail. And the models look great. They don't look bad at all. They're dealing with the limitations of what they had back then, but because the people who made the movie were such experts at what they were doing, it comes out still looking good in 2016 now. These practical effects still look great. You have a much more limited things that you can do with them versus CGI. CGI, you can shoot a ship from any angle, doing anything. There are no limits. With the models, there's a lot of limits because of the way that you have to shoot to make those models continue to look realistic. So the variety of shots would be greater in a modern movie, but the shots that are there with these ships still look great in Star Wars, and I still think they're very effective. And I think they only get more effective in the other movies in the original trilogy and well, I'll just say the original trilogy because they're the ones that still use models. Especially by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, like they're really good at shooting these ships, doing these things, and they look fantastic. But they still look great in Episode 4. The shots are a little bit limited because of budget constraints and because of the constraints of the medium that you're working with, but they still look good. The painted in sort of lightsabers don't look quite as good in this movie as they do in other movies. And in the special edition, they actually fix quite a bit of them. But they still look okay, and they still are effective. The blasters have these blaster bolts that are basically painted in over the frame, kind of like what you have here. But they still look okay. You know, we forgive the flaws because in the context, we're not taking in the details of why or why not the blasters might look slightly not perfect. We're okay with it. Plus, we don't have any blasters to compare it to, so we're comparing an unreal thing to our imagination of an unreal thing, and we just sort of let it slide. It works. And I know I'm using "we" incorrectly. Please forgive me for that. But yeah, for me, I am forgiving it. I'm a lot more forgiving of it. What else? The costumes look pretty good. Stormtroopers are very interesting. So the costumes generally look good, and the thing about the costumes is that they're simple. It's kind of one of those things that less is more. The officers are dressed in their simple officer's garb with their little insignias that are basically just painted wood, but it works. We're not trying to overload it with something that would be impractical or ugly, and instead it's simple, straightforward, and looks good. One thing I will say about the costumes, Obi-Wan's robe, the way he wears it is kind of a little odd. Like Alec Guinness looks just a bit odd in his robe sometimes when like the hood wants to fall off. But the robe works. It's a functional piece of clothing. You know, Luke's sort of wrapped legs and simple shirt, those work because they're practical clothing. Han Solo is wearing like practical boots, practical clothing. Everybody's wearing things that make sense. Where I think the costumes, I'm showing Stormtroopers here because Stormtroopers are an interesting costume, and they're a costume that lots of people love. But if you actually take time and look at the Stormtroopers, you can see the costumes actually kind of cheap and not that good. But I like the way it's designed. What they did was they made a bunch of molded plastic. As you can see, these aren't really clones, like they're supposed to be clones, but these are different extras of different heights, and you needed a costume that a whole bunch of people with various body types could put on and have it look good in. So you have just a bunch of plates of plastic that overlap, and they attach at the shoulders with adjustable straps. The knees are different to sort of break things up. This is a cool detail, or the fact that each knee looks a little different. But you could put these plates on any person and they're going to look kind of okay. You can see with this guy, there's a bigger gap between the plates. You know, and this guy, everything's overlapping very nicely so that it looks more like a practical suit of armor. My guess is they made everything, in fact, I'm almost certain that they made everything of almost an exact same size and just found a way to get it to fit on every single person. But they are effective, even though it's just molded plastic, right? It shouldn't really look that good. When we see it in context, it's always with these groups of stormtroopers, and we just get this like wall of white death, and I think that works really well. Something else I neglected to mention about the visual style. If we look at all of the visual style, it's very gray. There's actually very little color in Star Wars. And when we do see color, it tends to really stand out to us. Okay, it's mostly there's colors of gray and brown, black and white. And the fact that the Empire, it's because we're seeing a lot of the Empire doesn't really use color. Everyone wears like gray or black or white because that's what gives us an impression of order and unity. So it's very effective. The sets all look really good. I really loved the fact that there's a lot of detail in the sets. They're handmade sets, and it really, again, lends to that level of detail. The props look more menacing now than they used to, or now look more menacing here than they do now. This looks more like it might be a real gun than I think the new sort of plastic looking ones do. And stormtroopers carry weapons of various sizes, and they all look fairly scary. Let me transition and talk a little bit about some of the flaws of the movie, because I think the flaws are forgivable, and I do think this is definitely like a 9 out of 10 movie. Great movie, but there's also little things, right, that kind of break that immersion. One of the things is the fact that you always have stormtroopers shooting kind of from the hip, and shooting from the hip is not something you actually do. I think these were, they're extras. They're not trained soldiers. They're not experienced shooters, and these rifles don't have butt stocks either. So normally you're gonna have a rifle with a butt stock, so you can aim down the barrel through the sights at your target and accurately hit it. By the time you get the prequels, the troopers actually do that. That is a detail that's added. But in this one, they kind of shoot from the hip. It's like, no wonder they can't hit anything, because they're not aiming down their sights. So that's one of those things it's one of those things that just looks a little odd. Like people using the blasters, they just feel a little uncomfortable with them. Another flaw is actually Carrie Fisher's acting in this movie. Not that she is a bad actor, but the movie starts off with her doing this sort of pseudo-British accent. It sounds like a transatlantic accent. And then at the end of the movie, it just morphs into her normal American accent, and she sounds fine. So I'm not sure if this is, in fact, I'm not sure how much of a flaw this is, because at the beginning of the movie, she's trying to pretend to be this super important person, this chancellor, this ambassador. And so she's trying to talk in a way that I think sounds very formal. And then later on, she just becomes sort of herself once she is escaping. But I think that wasn't really intended. I think she sort of was trying to do a more adult-like accent at the beginning, and a more serious accent, which ends up sounding transatlantic, and then it just gets kind of abandoned as the movie's produced. So that's a kind of a weird thing. Sometimes there's little details like with the stormtroopers that you're like, well, this looks like plastic. There's little things with the sets that's like, this is obviously, a piece of painted wood. But unless you are really knowing to look for those things, you're probably not going to take them in as a viewer. You're probably not going to notice a lot of the flaws in the movie. Some of the dialogue is a little obvious, but in some cases it has to be obvious, especially when you're talking about the Force. So most of it I forgive. It's not all dialogue that is extremely memorable, but it's functional dialogue, and functional dialogue is fine because that moves the plot forward. Let me also talk about the special editions in regard to this movie, Episode 4, A New Hope. I did watch the special edition. My overall impression is that the special edition is an improvement on the original in this capacity. It has enhanced and improved the sound, and it has enhanced and improved the visual quality of everything in general. So things look sharper, clearer, brighter. Things look and sound better than they did on the VHSs. Again, I'm also doing a terrible bad thing in comparing things across medium, but when I see digital versions of the original theatrical cut, they also don't look quite as good as the special edition. George Lucas does add some things in the special edition that I think a lot of people hate, and what I will say is that most of them are unnecessary and not bad. They are not necessary, with the exception of one scene, which is both unnecessary and bad. It's actually much worse than unnecessary. It actually actively works against the cut of the movie. And that scene is when Han runs into Jabba the Hutt out in front of his ship. When they originally shot it, they had just a guy standing there. And George Lucas had originally planned on cutting him out and putting in a stop motion creature of some kind. Well, that didn't happen, and they ended up cutting the scene. And it was a good thing they cut the scene, because the scene feels awkward. Jabba the Hutt, up close like that, computer generated. He didn't look good when the special edition came out in the 90s. I remember thinking that. And he didn't look good when they redid his model, they gave him a higher res model in like 2009 for the Blu-ray release. And he looks better, but he still doesn't look right. And he doesn't talk right. He doesn't act like the Jabba we know from Return of the Jedi, which has some continuity issues with fans. But overall, he just doesn't look very convincing. They're having this like conversation that seems overly civil, but Han is being a jerk to him, even though he just sent Greedo basically to capture him. Han's just killed Greedo. Jabba doesn't seem that upset about it. And overall, just the scene isn't necessary. We get the vital information from the scene with Greedo, that people are after Han and that he owes money to people. That's the point of that scene with Greedo. We don't need the scene with Jabba the Hutt and a digital Boba Fett like walking around in the background. We just don't need to see. Any of that. And that's my thought on that particular scene. That one doesn't work out. It's not a good scene. It's a rather bad scene, and the movie would be better without it. But other than that, some of the little things that are added, they don't necessarily detract from the movie as much as I think some people think they do. So while I'm talking about the special editions, there are some things that I think actually are like a little bit of an improvement, like the ships taking off from the Rebel base. We get to like actually see the ships rather than just like some colored lights kind of shooting off into the horizon in a weird way. We have some added shots of like Mos Eisley. They don't look that bad. I think the mistake that George Lucas made with the dewbacks in the desert with the stormtroopers is that he put those in the forefront. I talked about this in my CGI video. Whenever you put something in the front of a frame, people are going to pay special attention to it. And when it's CG, there's a possibility that the viewer could see that is really fake. And he kind of made that mistake. Because in the original version, the dewbacks weren't even moving. They were just like, I don't know if they were constructed models or something, but they just stood still in the background. In this one, they were placed with digital ones that actually move, and in the background, they don't look bad. In the foreground, we can kind of see that they're not real. They did add some other creatures into Mos Eisley that are, fairly obviously CG, and I guess you could debate whether or not they look good. The main thing about them is that they're not really necessary for the scene to be effective. But overall, I think some of the added shots to Mos Eisley do make it seem like a bigger, dirtier kind of town. Like it does kind of enhance that particular feel, but it's always like a mixed bag, because while you have one thing that helps, you have others that are kind of detractory. So the special edition is really a mixed bag. I do appreciate some of the enhanced explosions. I think those are good. But otherwise, the special editions don't really change all that much, other than really improving the visual quality. So when you watch the special editions, take them with a grain of salt. And if you're watching the special edition of Episode 4, just skip right over that scene with Jabba the Hutt. Just don't even watch it and pretend it doesn't exist, because it doesn't look good. It goes against the story. It's just not a good scene. It should have remained one of those curiosities for fans to watch on like the second discs of their Blu-rays or whatever. So anyway, that is my analysis and review of Episode 4. I really do like the movie. There's a reason that people love Star Wars, and it all starts with that movie. It's a very well done movie. If you haven't ever seen Star Wars, I can't imagine anyone watching this hasn't, then you should probably watch it. It's a cultural icon, and it's a good movie. It's just a good movie to watch. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You can check out my websites, dbspress.com, davidbstewart.com, and let me know, of course, what you want to see, more of anything that you want to see in the comments. And thanks for listening to me ramble about Star Wars. I appreciate it.